Stewart Fulton here in Japan, sending you the best news, reviews, previews, interviews, all the views from the land of the rising sun, pro wrestling, pro grappling, kickboxing, mixed martial arts, and especially a focus on those who are responsible for releasing the Kraken. This is Kraken Chronicles. Stewart Fulton in Japan. My guest today is a retired mixed martial artist from Michigan in the US of A, who carved out his career fighting in Japan in the Shooto and Deep organizations. He incredibly attained his black belt in judo through the Kodokan Institute, no mean feat, at the age of 18. He's a BJJ black belt and has published a book on his incredible life story titled Tunnel Visions, Memoirs of a Mixed Martial Arts Champion. Ryan Bowe, welcome to Kraken Chronicles.
Hey, thanks for having me, Stu. Long time no see.
Yes, it's great to have you back in Japan, and it's great to have you on the podcast today. So let's rewind to the late 1990s when you first came to Japan. Talk us through that time arriving here and what led up to your judo training here in Japan and eventually attaining your black belt way back in 1997.
Yeah, wow. How many years ago was that?
Too many.
Yeah, too many. So I moved to Japan originally when I was 17 years old. It was January, and I came to the language school, actually. And I was studying every day. You know, I didn't speak anything when I touched down, but every day, 8 hours a day, language school. The plan was to do that for 6 months and then kind of figure out life from there. But as a martial artist and a kid, my objectives were a little bit different, you know. School was one thing, but all I cared about was training. So right when I got into town, I asked the school because I didn't know anyone, right? And I said, is there any way I can train judo here? And the school was located in a small city in Saitama Prefecture called Fukaya. And I don't know if you've been there, Stu, but there's literally not much there, right? It's a small local town. There's no English speakers. So I was thrown into the thick of it from day one. And luckily, someone at the school had a friend who happened to be a judo coach, and I would tag along with him. He would come pick me up, and he would drive me to one of the local high schools where I was able to do judo throughout the week. And then on Sundays, I'd go to the local police office or the police station and do judo there as well. Yeah. And man, I'm telling you what, because judo culture in Japan is very much kind of like wrestling culture in the US, where they're really hard-nosed, they're training hard every day. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into at that time. I mean, I was young. I thought I was just going to come in, and I believed in my skills. I was going to wipe the mat with anybody. And that was just not the case. I was getting thrown all over the place. But that's how we learn, right? That's how we learn. So,
yeah,
you know, by day I was studying, and I'm not an academic, or I wasn't at that time. You know, I struggled in school, and you know, I didn't want to learn kanji. That's the Chinese characters that go along with the Japanese language. And I'm like, you know what? Can't I just go outside and play baseball? Can't I just go out there and do judo? Can't I just train and learn naturally? And that was kind of frowned upon at the time, but over the years, it did grow into my number one way to kind of learn the language as well. So, but back to judo, man, training in the evenings with the high school, like I said, on the weekends at the police station. Again, those were with adults. And I did well enough to be invited to, at one point, after about 3 months of training, to test for my brown belt. at the Kodokan. And back then, the way it was done is it was like a today I guess you would compare it to a jiu-jitsu tournament where you turn up, there's a lot of competitors in the room, and you're all testing. And you're not doing like the judo kata or just doing throws. You're competing. And if you win enough, you get your belt. And the same goes for when I tested for my black belt. And over those 6 months, I earned my brown belt and black belt, and I never lost a match. Now, I'm not going to claim to be good at judo because I'm not. And, years later, when you're training with Olympians and things of this nature as they transition into MMA, I was getting thrown left and right. So I'm not claiming to be great at judo. But in those years, in the late 90s now, you could shoot a double leg. You could touch the legs. And I took full advantage of that rule in obtaining my black belt. And I'll just leave it at that when it comes to judo.
So what you're saying is you wrestled your way to a black belt.
Yeah, let's go with that.
No, I like that. I like that whole idea of attaining your belt through hard work and showing and proving. You don't just show up to practice and then after a certain amount of time you get your black belt. You really have to go out there and, like you said, compete. And
Yes.
the other thing a lot of people don't realize is, like you said, you're going to the police station to
Yep.
train. A lot of people don't realize that most of the police stations, not the koban, the police boxes, but the police stations have a tatami matted area to do judo and aikido and other training, which they do regularly.
Yeah. There were some beasts on the mat there. I'm not gonna lie. Like I said, they were all adults. And men and women both, and they were really good, and they handed it to me.
It's not uncommon to see police officers here with cauliflower ear. I mean, that's how
Yeah.
deep martial arts is connected to the police force here.
And this wasn't, these aren't white belts. The amount of black belts in the room, I'd say the majority were black belts in the
Wow.
room. So I had my work cut out for me, and it
Yeah.
was sink or swim. You know what I mean? But they were nice. Obviously, they were adults. I was a kid, so they were nice to me. But it was a learning experience, and man, it shows you what struggle is, and having to overcome and move forward, and just that grit. Like they say today, that you're gonna find out if you got that dog in you. And I like to think I learned how to do that here. Right? It's something that I wasn't born with. I just did. I wasn't tough. I wasn't. I don't like pain to this day, but through learning and through being somebody that's young and coming into a foreign place and having to rely on yourself for so many different things, it was sink or swim in just so many ways and at so many times in my life.
I think also you did the right thing going the language school route. I can't stress that enough to anybody who wants to come out and spend a reasonable bit of time in Japan and either work or train. Learning the language is so helpful. I mean, especially back in the 90s, very few people would have spoken English. Now it's a little bit different. You go to most gyms and there's one or two people that can speak a little bit of English. But back then, I mean, you had to know the lingo.
Yeah, I have pictures from back in the late 90s where I was the only foreigner in the gym. There was no English. There were no foreigners. There was no English explanations for anything. So you needed the language, and it provided to be a great way to learn the language. You blow your knee out, you go to the hospital. How do I say knee? True story. Words stick like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah,
No.
that was yeah.
Yeah, it's it changes everything for sure, and it helps you enjoy your stay here more because you're learning not just the martial arts and the culture, but the language, and they're all tied in together very closely.
Very much so. like without the language, I mean, you run into this brick wall of what you can do here. There's not many options. I mean, you can within just the English speaking world, your options are going to be limited. So the more Japanese you speak, the more doors it opens, the more friendships you're going to have. And over time, that's just going to compound and it's going to be very different in the experience, especially if you're living here and you plan to live here for a long time. By
For
all
sure.
means, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely learn the language.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you made your name in Japan basically, but you actually started your MMA career in Super Brawl in Hawaii in one of those old school one-day tournaments.
I did.
So take us back to that day. 3 fights in one night. 3 first round submissions. You effectively debuted with an almighty release of the Kraken. What was that like?
Man, so those were the good old days. I always refer to the dark ages of MMA as it was the good old days because it was something special to us. You had to be a little bit crazy to be involved in the sport alone at that time. So I was actually still based in Japan, when I was fighting in Super Brawl. I had a short stint out in San Jose, California. I had tested on, the famous Lions Den test with Ken Shamrock and whatnot. I had taken Frank Shamrock's test. I tested on to Team USA at that time. And I was representing Frank Shamrock. However, I was living in Japan, Yokohama, Japan. I was training out of Shooting Gym Yokohama. So all of my training was based here in Japan. And we flew out to Hawaii, and I flew out with the Japanese team and the Japanese media and met up with Frank. And there was another fighter on Frank's team named James. I forgot his last name at the time. He went on to have a career in the UFC as well. But man, there was an engine failure before we boarded the plane, so they had to go find us a new plane. I'm young. I don't know any of this stuff. I'm cutting weight. So just getting to Hawaii was stressful in itself because we arrived at 5 a.m. on the day of the fight.
Talk about cutting it fine.
Yeah, we arrived at 5 a.m. We get to the hotel, and we've already made weight or whatnot, but you don't know where you're at. You don't know what's going on. But come 8 a.m., we're up. We're having breakfast, getting our bearings. And a little bit later that day, we're shipping off to the arena. This was held at Blaisdell Arena. And at the time, Super Brawl was like the feeder to the UFC, if you will. It was all the big names were going through Super Brawl. Even later, in later years, you got Rich Franklin, Victor Belfort, Josh Barnett. I think the year after I won it, he won it. So all these names that were fighting in Super Brawl would eventually end up in the UFC. So at this time, as you said, this was a one-day tournament, and I had to fight 3 times in the same night to win it. And that's a feat in itself, and it's something that we don't see now.
No,
Can
it's
you imagine
incredibly tough.
the amount of injuries we have after one fight, and you're sitting between fights and you have to get up and you have to do it again. So going out there in my first fight, it was against a guy named Eric Reicher. It was a local guy from Hawaii. I don't know his training background. Back then, it could have been anything. I mean, there's a lot of people that were self-trained, not, Hawaii or a lot of gyms, even in America at the time, didn't have access to what we have today. But Frank Shamrock was in my corner, and I'll say, man, so much was going through my head at the time. And he was like, I got you. Just listen to me. I'll be in your ear the whole time. And he walked me methodically through every fight in the tournament. I took Eric Reicher down and ended up winning by armbar from Mount. And then so that was the first round of the tournament, right? In the final fight of the first round of the tournament was a fight between Oishi-san from Shooto, son Masahiro, he went on to win a Shooto World Championship. And he fought a guy named Cheyenne Patakin. So this is the last fight of the first round of the tournament. And Cheyenne Patakin ended up knocking out Shooto's representative. Because Shooto had sent their own professional to fight in this tournament and kind of represent them. He ended up getting knocked out in the first round. Now, I was on the sidelines with the towel draped over my shoulders. Frank was like, he wouldn't let me watch the fight because Cheyenne had bombs in both hands and he was unloading. But he was just like, just stay calm, stay focused. Okay, round two, or fight two rather. Fight two was against a guy named Matt Hamilton. He was coming in underweight. Back in those days, I think the tournament was at 150 pounds. Matt today probably would be fighting 135, but those weight classes didn't exist. And, I walked across the ring, threw an overhand right, kneed him in the gut, and mounted him and just started wailing on him. And he was just covered up. I went for an armbar again, but he was slick. He went out. He tried to go out the back door with the what's it called, where you spin out the back way, and tried to escape. And the referee got in the way for a split second, but I was able to recover the position and secure the armbar for that second win. Cheyenne Patakin ended up, I think, knocked out another guy, or he pummeled another guy in round two. So in the finals, it was me versus Cheyenne Patakin. He'd already beat the representative from Japan. And now you had this amateur Shooto fighter that had, I got third in all Japan, but I wasn't there representing Japanese MMA at that time. And when the bell rung versus Cheyenne, before the fight, rather, Frank was like, I need you to get chest to chest with him as fast as you can, because I don't want him doing to you what he did to those other guys. The bell rang. I literally ran right across the ring, got chest to chest with him, just right in his face, right in his face. And started throwing knees to his thighs. Eventually, I got the takedown, mounted him, and man, he didn't have technique, but man, he could crack. He was punching back from bottom. I went for an armbar. Nope, couldn't get it. He didn't want to tap. I didn't want to lose the position. Kept top position, but eventually, I landed enough shots to get him to turn over. And I got that rear naked choke, and yeah, that was a really special night because I got my hand raised in front of at that time, 6,000 people, Blaisdell Arena. I know Ensign, was there. A lot of people were there. Randy Moss from the Minnesota Vikings, was it? He was in attendance. So there were some big names there, and man, it was a great feeling for a young 18, 19-year-old to get their hand raised in Hawaii after getting there at 5 a.m. that morning. It was all surreal, man. It was a great experience, and it put my career on the right path from that moment forward.
Yeah, I mean, what a way to start. And you're right, it must have felt so surreal. I mean, never having fought before in front of people like that, going out of the country, cutting weight, and then 3 straight wins. I think you spent less than 6 minutes in the ring with all 3 fights, like 3 first round submissions and the first 2 in about a minute. I mean, just phenomenal way to debut yourself as a pro MMA fighter. And for anybody who wants to look back in the archives, that was, I believe, Super Brawl 11 out in Hawaii, and that was February of 1999.
I want to say it was the day after my 18th, or my day after my 19th birthday. So it would have been like February 4th or something like that.
February. Yeah, beginning of February. Hmm. Right. Finally, for the Book of Chronicles,
Yeah,
you have fought, you have taught, you still teach, you've written a book, you're still writing, and back in the day, you had a fight scheduled for the first UFC lightweight championship, which unfortunately
yeah,
wasn't to be. Uh, can you open some doors on that for us?
yeah. So that man, that was a difficult time for me because, well, let's take that a little bit back. So I was before I was born, right? I had a stroke in the womb, and as a result, a cyst developed. It's about the size of a fist. It sits right in my head to this day. And, I didn't know that when I was young, but fast forward, um, I I had to have a MRI done, and that's when I learned myself. I think I was 17 when I found out. And most children who have had this happen to them have some form of cerebral palsy. So I'm blessed in that regard that I didn't end up with that. But that cyst being there, when I signed with the UFC, I had to pass. I had to give them a CT, and they saw the cyst. And I want to say it was just a couple weeks out because I did the whole training camp it was supposed to be for the inaugural lightweight championship of the world versus Jens Pulver. And unbeknownst to me, because this is the dark ages, we were on the underground forum. That's how we communicated. We couldn't just jump on a podcast and do this, right? So, I found out on a forum that my fight had been canceled just a couple weeks out from the fight. And then in my place, Calder Uno from Shooto replaced me and ended up fighting Jens for that lightweight championship of the world. That single fight would have had the ability to change my life forever. And I'm not gonna lie, it's something that's been on my mind since that day because had that opportunity, had I had that opportunity to go out there and fight, I may very well have gotten my hand raised. So, man, that whole ordeal was just something because I couldn't really talk about it at the time, right? Because if I'm saying, yeah, I got a cyst in my head, I couldn't pass the medicals, that could have gone on to hurt me in wanting to fight here in Japan. So we just kept it under wraps. Unbeknownst to organizations here in Japan, I was trying to, call the doctors in the Nevada Athletic Commission and the New Jersey Athletic Commissions, trying to go out there and go undergo medical evaluation with them. But at that time, I talked to Dana White on the phone, and he said, "Look, if you win the lightweight championship, we need you to defend the title in Vegas. You can't just at that time there was like UFC Japan or whatever, but we need you to defend in Vegas. And if you can't get licensed, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to have you fight." And it pretty much ended there because at that point in time with the sport was at such a fragile point. They were just legalized it in Vegas, right? The athletic commissions were just getting behind it. From their perspective, right? If an athlete would have died in the cage at that point in time, I don't know how the sport could have recovered from that, is how they explained it to me. And now being older, I see why they made the decision that they did. But at that point in time, I just didn't get it because I was like, I felt like I was born for this. Like I was born to fight. And that chance was being stripped from me. And I was one of the best in the world. And I just wanted the opportunity to kind of prove that, especially in the US where I'm from. But, that never came to be. And so is life, man. So we move on. And, it's like we have obstacles, but It's all about overcoming them. And I stayed in Japan. That's one of the things that kept me here in Japan competing, is because I didn't have to pass a CT examiners and or whatnot, and I was allowed to compete. Yeah, even reliving it, it's kind of hard because, man, like I said, there's a handful of opportunities that you have in life to really achieve something, and that was kind of stripped from me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's
But
nothing that I
you,
could have done to change that.
of course, yeah, it's completely out of your hands. But you didn't let that stop you. I mean, this is going back to 2000, early 2001, and you just kept
Right.
going. You just kept fighting out here, and then eventually you went on to get your BJJ black belt in 2016 under Rafael Halbert,
Hmm. I did, yes. So,
and mhm.
so yeah, by that point in time, I was living in Dubai. Actually, I was coaching out of Team Noguera Dubai, and my professor there, Rafael Halbert, man, graciously, yeah, he promoted me to black belt. That was a moment because I didn't come up doing jujitsu here in Japan. Shooto was a martial art or a sport in and of itself. So jujitsu was the rival, if you will. It was Japanese MMA versus Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I was very much pro Japan, Team Japan, bring it. You're not submitting me. But over the years, you know, you I learned to respect jiu-jitsu. I fought some of the top athletes, and man, they're good. They're good. And I wanted to learn it. I put the gi on. I started training in the gi. And I didn't, having been a professional fighter, I didn't want to just go straight to black belt. I did it the proper way: white belt, blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, black belt. From the bottom to the top. And while I was out there in Dubai, I think you said December of 2016, yeah, I was promoted to black belt. And today, I'm a second degree black belt.
Wow, your whole story is inspirational, and the fact that you're still going and still an integral part of the mixed martial arts out here in Japan is just great. We're very lucky to have you. And I already mentioned your book, Tunnel Visions: Memoirs of a Mixed Martial Artist. Can you tell us where we can get a hold of that and what else you're working on just now?
Okay, so Tunnel Visions is available on Amazon. We also have it out on my website, ryanbo.com. And then also we did a audio book version as well. So you can pick up the audio version as well. Everything gets available on Amazon or directly on Audible. Right now, well, over the last 5 years ago, I'm trying to adapt my story into a movie and come up with it's not a cradle to the grave story, but we're going to kind of focus on a specific time point of my life. I'm trying to develop that into a movie. The screenplay is finished and we're shopping it around. But what I've also gone ahead and done, what I'm working on today, is taking that version of my story and writing a book around that. And that's going to be released later this year. It'll be available on all the normal websites. Amazon, probably the main one. But definitely check that out later this year. It'll be up on my website. It'll be up on my social media, Instagram account.
I will do.
So
Yeah, yeah. And where can we see you on social media? Where can we catch you?
okay, I'm on Instagram at Ryan Bo MMA. Um, you can follow the film project on Facebook at Fighting Blind the Movie. Um, that's the name of it. And the book, the new book that's coming out, is also going to be called Fighting Blind as well. And one thing I should have said earlier is that it's called Fighting Blind because that cyst that I have, well, I also have a visual impairment that was a secret, whereas
Mhm.
I'm blind to the left out of both eyes, which has gotten me knocked out on multiple occasions, but I couldn't talk about that either.
Yeah, I have a feeling that you and I could talk for hours on this, and we might have to revisit some of your other stories in your amazing career at some point in the future, Ryan. Really, I can't thank you enough for joining me here today, and I urge everyone to check Ryan Bowe out on social media, check out his books, and keep tabs on what's coming up in his life. Ryan, thank you very much for joining Kraken Chronicles.
Thanks for having me, Stu, man. It's good to reconnect, and we'll have to do it again sometime.